I go Nora Thompson from my name. Like most evenings since arriving in Monte Carlo, tonight I found myself seated alone at a little cafe on the outskirts of the busy casino square. After graduating from a posh college stateside, all I wanted was a basic break, distant from the opulent world I was born into. From hotels to technology companies, my dad seems to possess half the planet. To keep things honest and to drive the vultures away, though, I used my mom's last name. The evening was cool when he arrived. Daniel appeared to be in charge, or at least as he felt he was. Pulling out the chair across from me without asking, swaggering over with a confidence that I suppose comes from wearing a suit more than most people's rent, "Mind if I sit?" he asked at last after having taken a seat. His smile was obviously charming, most likely learned. I answered, only glancing up from my coffee, "Looks like you're already sitting." He laughed. The sound seemed a little too perfect. "You are Daniel, and I am Daniel." I responded sharply, "Nora," giving him a brief once-over. Not my normal kind, too polished, but definitely beautiful. "So, Nora, what brings a girl like you to a pricey haunt like this all by yourself?" His voice seemed like a tease, and I wasn't sure if I would find entertainment or irritation. "Just enjoying my coffee," I said evasively. "What's your pardon?" I would be lying, even though I could claim business. Let's say tonight I'm looking for something intriguing, and it seems like I might have found it, he remarked, staring me steadily. I arched an eyebrow. "Hope the coffee meets your expectations, then." Daniel gave a chuckle. "Something tells me it's already exceeded them." "I came here not to make friends. Obviously not looking for a fling. Look, I'm certainly not interested in whatever game you're playing, and I'm not one of those girls that falls for lines if that's what you're aiming for." "Who says I'm playing a game?" His voice dropped a little as he asked. I said, "Experience. You start with a cue, sit down uninvited, and expect what? Phone number. Just a date." Leaning back, he seemed really amused. "Now you're tough. I like that. Just talking, not searching for a number. If it is too much, though, utter the word and I will disappear." I gave him some thought just now. Monte Carlo was lovely but isolated. Perhaps a little conversation might help. Conversation is good, but keep it light. We spoke for a good while. The chat was shockingly simple. I offered no personal details. He did not press for them. I was actually enjoying the talk as the evening descended, despite first misgivings. Unlike the usual men who would try to wow me with their connections or cash, Daniel wasn't like that. He seemed to be used to the finest things, but not defined by them. The dusk cooled down, and it was time to head off. As I stood to go, "Well, Daniel, this was unexpectedly pleasant," I said. "Surprised yourself, huh?" asked he, grumbled, and inquired with a smile. "Perhaps just a little bit. Good night, Daniel." His comments repeated faintly in my head as I returned to my flat. Monte Carlo was truly full with surprises. Maybe tonight I would have come across one. Following that initial meeting with Daniel, Monte Carlo's evenings appeared a little less lonely. Whether I was enjoying a late dinner by myself or browsing the neighborhood markets during the day, he seemed to be everywhere. His tenacity surprised me. It was not at all unpleasant. Perhaps in part because he was not demanding. He simply appeared really interested in hanging around with me. He walked over 2 coffees in hand and sat down next to me silently one breezy evening as I was seeing the sun set below the horizon. Assuming I wanted coffee, I poked fun, lifting an eyebrow. He carried a cup to me. "If I'm mistaken, I'll sip both." "Good estimate," I remarked, taking the coffee. We sat in solitude for some time, the sound of the waves filling the quiet times. Daniel said at last, "You never told me what you do back in the States." I shrugged, not thinking it important. "I work. I'm just loving not working right now." "Fair enough," he said with laughter. "Everyone's got a story, though, don't you think? We settled into a simple schedule over the next several days. Daniel showed me portions of Monte Carlo I had not previously seen. We discussed everything, including nothing: movies, literature, our preferred cuisine. While I was all about the oldies like Sean Connery, he loved to debate the finest James Bond actor, fervently supporting Daniel Craig. He stopped abruptly one day as we were meandering along the beach and looked at me gravely, a gaze I had not seen before. "Nora, I know I'm just some man you met at a cafe, but these last weeks have been, I'm not sure, exactly different. Better still because of you." I stopped too, not sure what to say. Not what I intended to handle here were emotions. "Daniel, I enjoy our hanging out. I do, but for myself, this is only a break. I'm not searching for complications." He nodded gently, then inhaled deeply. "I understand it. Not under pressure. Just know that I am here, okay? And you really are very fantastic." Days stretched into weeks, and my stay in Monte Carlo was nearing close end. Spending more and more time with Daniel, what began as informal walks and discussions evolved into late-night dinners and early morning brunches. Falling in love with someone under Mediterranean stars was the last thing I expected. Then one evening, he made a bombshell drop-off. "Come back with Nora, work in the States for my firm. Though I know it's abrupt, I just think it may be fantastic." The concept was wild, really absurd, and yet part of me yearned, driven by the adventure and the concept of grabbing this, whatever it was, and seeing where it may go. Returning to the States seemed as though one were entering another planet. Daniel's offer invited into his life rather than only a job. I was suddenly a regular girl who'd lucked out living in an ordinary flat in an average district of town. But my father saw ordinary differently. One afternoon, just as I was sorting my last box, he walked up uninvited. As he stood in the doorway, towering and more than life, his explosive laugh permeated my little living room. Nora, hiding right in front of us, he laughed and gave me a huge embrace, nearly breaking my ribs. "Tell me then about this choice. You must find this man unique if you can move like this." Though his voice was light, I could know he was probing, doing his fatherly job to find any trouble. I slumped down on the couch. "The name of his is Daniel." "Dad, you are different. He is not aware of all this," I added, gesturing vaguely around to suggest the affluence and the complex strings accompanying it. Dad sat down next to me, his face now austere. "Nora, you know you cannot keep that a secret forever. Should he become a part of your life, he should know you." "I know Dad says I merely want to be sure about him before I complicate everything. Still, thanks for watching out for me. Like he used to when I was little, he combed my hair. Always, kiddo. Remember, I'm merely a phone away should you require anything. And I have eyes all around," he said with a wink. The next several weeks were a frenzy of adjusting to my new career in life. Though Daniel was always present, supportive, and as charming as ever, there was a sharpness to him now that he bore obligations. Daniel brought up a topic I had been fearing one evening over a calm meal at my house. "Nora, when do you suppose I will be able to see your parents? I sense a great void in your life." I stopped as the weight of the occasion sank over me. "Well, my dad's just a typical driver. My mom died a long time ago. Right now, we're not precisely on speaking terms." Daniel wrinkled his face, a trace of worry across it. "I regret to learn of it, but you know I would like to meet him whenever you are ready. Family is really important." I nodded, understanding fully the realities of my father's world, a world I wasn't ready to expose Daniel to yet, but appreciating his sincerity. Living with Daniel moved at a speed I never would have imagined. We were already harmonizing our life. I was working at his company and our relationship was developing more deeply. Though I suppose it all felt like we were preparing for something major, I was still surprised when that momentous event took place. That evening was like every other. We were in his flat, a nice, modern one with city skyline views. We just completed dinner. Nothing special, simply some takeout as neither of us felt like cooking. Sitting on the couch, a documentary about ocean life played in the background, the kind you see but not really watch. Daniel turned to me, his countenance more somber than the circumstances demanded. I felt my heart accelerate as he took my hand. "Nora, I have been thinking about us, about everything we have gone through, and about everything I want for us going forward." I nodded, my mouth dry at once. "Yes. Love you, Nora. I love everything about you and cannot see my life without you." He stopped and, clearly apprehensive, I could see him swallow hard. That applied to two of us? "I want to be with you always. Would you be married to me?" Like that. No ring box opening. No knee falling on one side. Simple, real, and so very Daniel. Indeed, the word came out in a rush, almost like relief. "Surely I will." He held me tightly and flashed that broad, contagious smile that had drawn me in from the first day. The remainder of the evening, we discussed our future, what we wanted, where we envisioned ourselves. Though everything seemed correct, it was thrilling and a little scary. When I told my parents, the next test arose. Though his answer was at best lukewarm, I expected him to be thrilled. "Nora, are you sure you know I only want your happiness? It's all happening so quickly," he added, his voice tinged with anxiety. "Dad, sure, you will see. He is a fantastic man." I aimed to project more confidence than I felt. He moaned. "All right, but promise me you will sign a prenup just to be safe." Though Daniel didn't know the whole depth of it, the word prenup didn't scare me. It was simply another element of the modern marriage package, especially with someone who had as much to lose as I did. "Obviously, Dad, we will address it." I told him that was good then. "Nora, I am not going to the wedding. I don't want to ruin your narrative of a modest girl." The introduction to Daniel's mother followed then. Her reception from beginning was frigid. She examined me closely with a cold-blooded glare over supper at their family house. "Daniel, are you absolutely positive about this girl?" She said squarely, "She doesn't seem like a fit for our family." Daniel tried to smooth things out, but his mother was unrelenting. "A prenuptial agreement is non-negotiable," she said. Knowing it might help to reduce some anxiety, I answered without thinking twice. "Absolutely, I wouldn't have it any other way," I answered as we subsequently formalized the terms under a lawyer's attendance. Notwithstanding these challenges, our Maldivian wedding was very beautiful. I had Hope standing next to Daniel on the beach underfoot and with the ocean murmuring behind us. It was simply our love, our future ready to be shaped together. Though familial expectations set a difficult path, wedded life began better than I could have anticipated. Daniel and I settled into our new house, a lovely space more than we would have ever needed. That was meant to be the start of our ideal life together. Driven to demonstrate that I was more than just the wife of the boss, I pushed myself back into work. Although my job at the company had always been demanding, there was now extra expectation involved. Apart from overseeing projects, I was involved in important decision-making procedures. At least first, Daniel seemed pleased. In meetings, he would introduce me with a slight air of pride. "This is Nora, our project head, and my wife." But as the months passed and the initiatives under my direction proved profitable and raised the company's prestige, something in Daniel changed. At first, it was subdued, a phrase here, a small gesture there. He raised it one evening as we were seated for dinner. "Nora, at work you're doing really well." Too wonderful, perhaps. Confused, I turned from my plate. "What do you mean, too fantastic? That is fantastic for the business." "It is," he said, gesturing his food around on his plate. "But you know the guys are beginning to mention it's becoming the Nora show over there." His comments stung just a little. "Isn't that a somewhat unfair? You would be delighted that we are doing well," I thought. I'm glad, but it's simply plenty. Everyone talks about you constantly, about your style of handling things. Makes one question where I stand. That chat marked the beginning of many others. The pressure between us increased along with the business. Daniel's once supportive attitude was now slightly resentful. I was perplexed. Wasn't it he the one who first pushed me to get going? Things deteriorated when his mother came to spend some few weeks with us. Her presence in the house brought an old-world conventional mentality that I had always managed to escape. She would remark casually about my work, about how a wife need to be more present in her house. "Nora, you show up at the office constantly. When could you be free to look after your husband?" she would state. I attempted to brush it aside in order to keep the peace, but her comments just served to widen the growing distance separating Daniel from me. Nothing at work appeared to be able to offset what was gradually disintegrating at home. Our marriage suffered more the more I accomplished. Daniel arrived home from work one evening with a grimace locked on. "Nora, I would advise you to leave the business. Our family needs our attention. Thus it seems that your involvement there is simply aggravating too much conflict." Leave the business? Why, though? I have been so very generous. My voice rang with a mixture of incredulity and resentment. That's for the best. You may concentrate on the house and perhaps start the garden you have always mentioned. His tone was contemptuous, as though he were choosing something small rather than my career. I discovered the following day that he had let go of every member of our house crew, including cooks, cleaners, gardeners. Right now, I was all. "You wanted to be more at home involved. Here's your chance," he stated almost coldly. Although I didn't mind cleaning, the way this was presented felt improper. The lovely, sympathetic man I married was not this. This was someone else, someone incredibly repressive and demanding. Staying with us at the time, his mother seemed to savor the circumstances. "It's good for a wife to focus on her home," she would add, grinning slightly every time Daniel mentioned my new job as a full-time housewife. I felt guilty as I grew used to this surprising change in my life, ashamed that I had not noticed this approaching, embarrassed to tell my father that perhaps Daniel was right. I was dubious but eager when Daniel proposed a trip to Monte Carlo to maybe rekindle what was left of our spark. When his mother declared she would be joining us, that hope passed fast. "It's been years since I've traveled," she yelled loudly as if it were an unimputable directive. Of course, Daniel greeted her with wide arms, not once giving what I might think any thought. We leased a little house in Monte Carlo, which was lovely but expensive, and it soon turned into a prison rather than a haven. Daniel and his mother saw the city as their playground from beginning. I was left to run the house while they leased opulent cars, visited stores, and ate at the best restaurants. They insisted on home-cooked food, reduced me to nothing more than a servant in a holiday house, cooking and cleaning after them as they gallivanted around the city. Days went by, and Daniel's mother's comments got more pointed, her tone more hostile. "Actually, Nora, living at someone else's cost must be rather the life, huh?" She would sneer, her comments a smack dressed in a smile. Daniel chuckled rather than stood up for me. Every time his laughter echoed over our makeshift house's frigid walls, it was a betrayal. I felt alone, the glitter of the city dulled by their contempt. One evening, we passed a magnificent old-style hotel whose front served as a reminder of a world of grace and dignity. Envy-filled in voice, Daniel's mother said, "Lucky billionaire Harris. Imagine running over a palace like that and having such a hotel." That evening, the final remnant of my tolerance collapsed in a cafe with a view of the sea. She signaled the waiter over with a great flip of her wrist as we settled down. "For Nora, the least expensive meal will work," she said loudly enough for the tables around to hear. "There is no need to treat her with luxuries she does not deserve." Daniel's answer was a laugh. His agreement came from the contemptuous flip of his hand as much as from his voice. Good call, Mom. Not too far should we go. Like the waves breaking on the rocks below us, humiliation swept over me. Rising from my chair, the sound of my seat reflected my stress. I confronted them both, my voice steady, louder than I meant. I will not tolerate this any longer, I said, hands shaking but resolve strong. I am divorcing Daniel, you say. As I left the restaurant, the coldness of treachery was far more than the cool air of Monte Carlo. Rather than coming to a tone, Daniel and his mother trailed behind with insults. My mother-in-law's voice, crisp and clear, rang out as I accelerated. Look just at her, a beggar unworthy of my son. My heart raced, but before I could get far, Daniel caught up and snatched my handbag from my shoulder, his fingers tightly clenched. Nora, this is my money. Go on, if necessary, get out on all fours. His voice was full of disgust as he snatched the handbag away, leaving me shocked on the sidewalk next him. His mother laughed savagely, her eyes shining with hate. Since Monte Carlo is all you are good for, maybe now you will learn to beg there. As I stood there wall-less and alone, their laughing rang down the street. But fate intervened as they launched their last insults. We were close to that magnificent old hotel, the one Daniel's mother had earlier dreamed about owning. Pointing to the hotel, she scoffed, maybe they'll let you in as a beggar. The hotel's gates opened at that same instant, and a guard materialized. He noticed me and his face lit with recognition. Warmly calling out Miss Harris, he moved with a courteous salute. The scene changed the instant he mentioned my name. Daniel and his mother stopped. Their looks changed from satisfaction to perplexity. The guard wore a big smile. Your father advised us you could visit. Kindly this way. Always reserved for you is the greatest room. Regarding Mr. Harris's directives, the face of Daniel's mother went white. Her previous words turned to ashes in her tongue. Harris. Like in the wealthy Harris, she stammered, her former confidence collapsing. Ignoring both, I straightened my posture and headed towards the guard. Thank you, Pierre, my voice cool and collected. Inside I had a mixture of vindication and relief. Daniel's cries started behind me, frantic. Please, Nora. I did not mean. Not to be left behind, his mother yelled past her son. Perhaps we could come in for a drink at least. I turned forward rather than back. As soon as I walked into the hotel, the doors closing behind me seemed symbolic, cutting off the tumult of my former existence. Pierre walked me to the reception, where staff members treated me respectfully because of the daughter of their company. The long flight back to the United States gave me plenty of time to consider my future. By the time I arrived, my determination had hardened like the city sidewalks, ready to be walked upon yet unbending against pressure. The next day I was in the office of a respectable attorney, papers all round like a war map. The attorney said, his tone a mix of surprise and indignation, "It looks your husband neglected to pay you bonuses owed for the multi-million-dollar deals you closed." That sounds about right, I said, my head whirling over the many hours I had spent working for that company, the success I had driven. We are suing for $3 million. While Daniel stood there stumbling through his defense, the courtroom was frigid and sterile, a far cry from the intense glares he sent across the room. Once loved, the man looked quite pitiful. Daniel's face fell when the decision came, a landslide triumph paying me $3 million. He tried one last plea outside the courthouse. Nora, everyone is laughing at me. I screwed. Can we go back? Once his words touched my heartstring, that moment had gone by. Daniel, you just missed the money. Perhaps pay less attention to your mother the next time, I suggested, the edge in my voice cutting through the clear air. Turning, I headed off, the sound of my heels on the ground signifying the end of that chapter. I came home facing my father. Until I broke the stillness, the air between us was dense with unspoken words. "Dad, I ought to have heard you." He gave me a kind and forgiving hug. "You had to pick your own learning curve. You now know, and knowledge is half the fight." We discussed life, errors, and fresh starts late into the evening. His guidance was a lighthouse as I negotiated future ideas. Motivated by our discussion, I started building the foundation of my next project. My time working for Daniel's company not only sharpened my abilities, but also stoked a passion for the field I couldn't ignore. I chose to launch my own investment company. With my experience and the large payout, I had the means to launch something meaningful, something my weeks became months as I developed my company from nothing. Though the obstacles were great, every one of them taught me something. Every accomplishment verified that I was headed in the correct direction. From a disappointed wife in a loveless marriage to a capable business owner, I realized how far I had come when seated in my new office tearing down the busy streets below. Though each one of them had strengthened me, the road had been full with challenges.